Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to How I Write. So we've had a bit of a quiet spell because we did some interviews with editors, but we are super excited to have one of my favorite poets, Jamal Mehmood, with us live this evening. Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much for joining us, Jamal. How are you doing?
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. I'm very, very well. Alhamdulillah. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm
Pleasure,
very.
pleasure and honor to be here.
Oh, mashallah. We've been looking forward to this for months. So alhamdulillah, I would not have missed this for the world. I'll just read a quick bio. It's a very brief bio, but it's a very juicy one. Jamal Mehmood is a writer and filmmaker based in London. His work has been featured at the Institute of Contemporary Art, Magma Magazine, BBC4, Poetry London Magazine, Popular and Media Diversified. He has been shortlisted for the Outspoken Prize for Poetry in Film and won the National Poetry Rivals. His latest book, The Leaf of the Neem Tree, which I will model here, you can see through my Zoom blur, is out on Hajar Press, and that was released in 2021. So welcome, Jamal. And we're so excited just to hear everything about your whole story. I'll just jump in very quickly with a very broad question. What started you writing?
It started quite a long time ago. So I was at kind of school age, I'd say early secondary school kind of age. I was just messing around and writing a few bits here or there, but it was always kind of few and far between just because there was no idea of, this ever going anywhere. And poetry specifically it was in my house in the sense that my mother was a fan of Urdu poetry, and at the time I never really got it, but she used to have this yellow notebook that she would keep with her, and if there was a poem on TV that she liked, she'd write it down, which goes to show what the difference in cultures were. I don't know how many poems we'd find on the BBC like that on in those days, but so yeah, she would write these poems down, and sometimes I think write some of her own as well, but it was always kind of away from me. At the time I couldn't read Urdu and didn't really have an interest in it. And then I think through hip hop, I came across the kind of English poetry, and again it was kind of just sitting in the back of my head. And I remember going on the way to school and listening to Kiss FM or whatever on the radio in the car, and the song finishing, and my mum saying, is this what you call poetry? And I didn't get it at the time, right? Because I was just like, just what does it matter? And but now I kind of understand where she was coming from. She comes from a culture where a lot of music is literally just poetry that's being sung. And so her lack of understanding of what was going on Kiss FM made a lot more sense now, and a lot more sense later on. And then at school, I enjoyed English. I did well at English, and I remember there was a school poetry competition, I think when I was around 15 or 16, and that kind of set me off into thinking that maybe I can do this every now and then. But again, it was never anything serious, and there was just a few times where people would kind of encourage me. I remember once this is a slight tangent, but we were in PE and we were playing table tennis, and I lost a game or something, and in as a joke, I began to start to throw the racket in anger, right? I knew I was doing something wrong, but I kind of, as I was doing it, it was too late. And the teacher saw me, and he said, absolutely not, you're banned from playing again. And I don't know why I did this to this day, but after he said that, I wrote him a letter pretending to be a professional table tennis player, saying, really laying it thick, saying that this ban is going to affect my career. And I really kind of laid it on in this long letter, and I put it through his underneath his door, and he read it and he found it funny. And the next time we met, he said, you can really, you should look into writing. Like, that was quite good. And so there was just moments like that in my kind of young life up to uni age, where people were like, this is actually quite good. But it wasn't until a lot later that it kind of bloomed into something else. But yeah, that was the start of it.
That's really funny. I love that story. I also find it's kind of interesting when you have one teacher or somebody at school who kind of just nudges you along. Did you feel that there was anyone, apart from those incidents, was there anyone who actually like supported you in your writing and like pushed you to further your career as a writer? At what point did you start thinking did you go from thinking this is something that I enjoy doing and I'm quite good at, to, oh yeah, I really want to focus on this?
Again, I did have an English teacher, Miss Edwards, who was really supportive, and I remember writing an essay. Well, no, it was a short story, I think, about the Iraq War, actually. So like my I guess politicization and political awakening happened a similar, in lockstep with writing more. And I remember she really liking that piece of work, and she said that, I'm going to send this into the local newspaper, and that gave me a lot of encouragement again, because it was never anything that I thought could go anywhere. And she supported my first book as well, and bought it and annotated it, and we met up and we spoke about it, which was really nice. But again, it was only until I think after university, where at university I started going to kind of open mic nights and the poetry society at university. And then even then it was always kind of a side, never really thought of it as a career. And then post university in around 2015, when I'd kind of stopped writing, I went to an arts council event in central London that was entitled, sustaining your career as an ethnic minority writer. And I just thought, okay, I didn't even know that there were careers in writing, even at that age. I just thought it was a strange concept. So I went along, and I, met writers who were leading the session who kind of had made a career out of it, and that really kind of told me, okay, there is some sort of blueprint that can be followed. And from then on, around 2015, is when I started to take it more seriously, and start submitting to competitions, and going to more open mics. And so that's kind of how it developed into something that I thought was serious. I kind of had to see physical proof of somebody having done it before I did it myself.
Yeah, completely agreed. And I often think that, what we really need is people who demystify that, because I often think, especially in the creative arts, if you don't have someone in your family or someone close to your family who is
Yeah.
a journalist or who is this or an artist or something like that, it's just not even imprinted into you that you can't imagine the people doing it, or like the behind the
Yeah.
scenes of it. You can consume the product,
Yeah.
but the witnessing of that whole process, that's why I really find it fascinating to talk to writers, because you get that sort of behind the scenes element. And Charlotte, it's useful as well for other writers at different stages in our writing careers or journeys. Of course, you don't have to turn it into a career, but just there's the satisfaction, I think, in sending your work off to a competition. So I just wanted to ask, you mentioned a blueprint. What would you say this blueprint is? I mean, obviously it's going to be different for people, but like, demystify.
Yeah, I think it's a strange one, because people ask me about this, and it's a lot of the writers that I know personally, even very kind of successful writers, very few of them that I know of write full time, right? It's always they have to teach, or they have to do a regular job of some sort. Sometimes that might be a kind of in a related, discipline. But the blueprint isn't a hard and fast rule, right? There's even, you can have a very, very successful book, and sometimes, somebody was telling me recently that in the poetry world, selling like 250 or 500 books is seen as extremely successful. And so when you frame it in kind of setting up a career, you think of, okay, there's some rule where you can make the same money you can in a corporate job, which is this is not the case for most people. And it is always, for a lot of very, very successful people, like I said, it is a case of just a continual grind of a commission here and a project here, and stop and start, and it's a difficult thing. So I never want to, whenever somebody who's looking to get into writing kind of speaks to me about this stuff, I never want to make it seem like it's it's easy once you follow these these 3 steps that everyone on Instagram will tell you to follow to become super, super successful. Because I think also that kind of way of looking at the world, and it's not just in the arts or in writing, but it's often just focused on the end product, in terms of, this is how you get published, and if you do this, then you'll sell this many. And there's not so much a focus on the craft, which became really important to me later than it should have done, which is why I'm so kind of passionate about it, and why I think what you're doing at Muslim Writers Salon is so important, because it's kind of more of a holistic way of looking at the writer, as opposed to just, follow these 10 golden steps and you'll have a published book, and as if that's the kind of golden result. And there's not enough, I think, whether for Muslim writers or otherwise, there's just not enough holistic support. I can only speak to the UK context, but with Arts Council funding and all of that, seemingly on its way down every single year, there's less and less opportunities for people to get consistent support. And the writers that I do see, and I know who are very good, many of them, if not, a significant proportion of them, have come from kind of writer development schemes, and I've benefited from those so much. And I just about caught them on the tail end of being, eligible in terms of my age. That's another issue, where a lot of the schemes by design are 18 to 25-year-olds, which is great. But then what about the 25 to 35s, and what about people who are older or looking to get in, what about their opportunities for developing? And so those kinds of schemes are really, really important, and I've benefited massively from being able to. A lot of them are also free. You just kind of apply, and there is a selection process, but to be able to have something that's free, where you have time with some writers who, now, for example, one of my teachers on one of these schemes is Roger Robinson, who won the T.S. Eliot Prize a couple of years ago. And there was others as well in people that I've been taught by, but it's just that stuff is really rare, and there's not enough of it to kind of to sustain a career or a pursuit as a writer, because you have this kind of push to publishing, but not much else. And yeah, it's a difficult one, but yeah, the blueprint is there, but it's kind of spotty, and you have to kind of see the patterns and see what you're able to do in your own position as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Oh, you touched on so many interesting points there. I've just been like scribbling little notes. I love Roger Robinson, and I love his whole approach as well. He has, it feels like a very holistic approach, in the sense that like some other writers who've kind of written for writers or written kind of guides. And so I bought his book on poetry, and I really enjoyed that. Because it really feels like, to me, learning to write is it is a kind of a personal development project, even though, like, yes, the craft element is there, and yes, if you want to make a living out of it, that's wonderful, you get a lot of deep satisfaction from it. But there's also this thing of, it's not just, like you say, it's not just making a product, it's not just like making a nice cupboard if you're a carpenter. Like, I mean, a carpentry also has that whole inner work as well. It's all like a metaphor for what's going on the inside. So I really appreciate you brought that up. And the mentorship element is very important to us. And apart from, building community, we really want to introduce more of that as well. We need funding too. It's great being a grassroots project. I love it.
Yeah.
It gives it that sense of, like, purpose, and we're not answerable to anyone but ourselves. And so, alhamdulillah, that's like amazing. We're able to make those decisions. But yeah, it would be great to be able to offer more of that, those exact sort of schemes that we're talking about, because I know what you're.
I think specifically as well in poetry, the barrier to entry is quite low, right? Especially if you come in through, like, a lot of, just even myself and other poets in the UK who came through the kind of open mic spoken word kind of circuit. The barrier to entry is low, which is in some ways is really good, because anybody can go and try. But that also has another side to it, where you can kind of say anything and you'll get a clap at the end, and you might think that you're developing through that, but it's not the case. And if you're not coupling that with a kind of commitment to reading and a commitment to craft, there's little room to develop. And I think there's no other art form really in my mind that people treat the way they treat writing or poetry. I mean, if I went to a violin open mic night and just did what I wanted to do every time and people clap, it's not going to get me very far, even though people might be very kind and clap at the end of it. And this whole idea of, play within art makes sense to a degree, but also really, really comes into fruition when you have a kind of a foundation on which you can play on. Like Miles Davis playing around is going to sound different to me playing around with any instrument, right? So I just think there needs to be some type of redress in, particularly in poetry, where there's more opportunities for people to develop their work. And yeah, I just wanted to add that in.
Yeah, I really appreciate you mentioned that, because it is also very important, and I've often said this as well, that like for me, I, even though it's very hard to accept feedback at the beginning, because like you pour yourself into it and you feel very attached to it, and it's very sensitive because it is so personal. But then
Yeah.
at the end you can start feeling like you're stagnating and you're like, something's wrong with this, but I don't know what it is, and nobody's willing to actually tell me what's wrong with it or help me to kind of move past this. I'm going to kind of spin my
Yeah.
wheels and a little bit. And I like the reference to music as well, because yes, you can play and, like getting finger paints out and just like splodging color everywhere is fun, and it's very cathartic, and it's therapeutic and fun,
Yeah.
especially for people who have a lot of perfectionism. But yeah, to have that balance between play and rigor, and like the rigor element
Yeah.
gives you that sort of refinement, or not refinement, but yeah, sort of sharpening your skills, honing the
Yeah.
skills. There's so much satisfaction as well when you kind of manage to do the thing that you've been trying to do for some time, and and make it work. I think for a lot of poets, especially people who are sort of in that mid zone where they've started out and they've started going to open mic nights and stuff, and then they want to progress, it can be very confusing as to what is a good poem, and how do I know that my poem is good? How do I even know? And would you have any advice on that question, on that topic?
I would say reading more really helps, and that doesn't necessarily have to be um books. It can be listening to poems, it can be reading about poems, but just understanding the different forms of good poetry there is out there. And if you look at a collection of poetry that is supposed to include, the best poems of last year, you can read that and you can think some of them are terrible, but they're in this book that's published by a big publisher, that says these are the best poems of 2023 or whatever. Yeah, just familiarizing yourself with what's out there in terms of um, what's being published, what's seen as good, and maybe thinking about why you like what you like. What is it specifically about what you're reading that you like or even dislike, and then kind of building your own, understanding your own style through that. And so making very kind of specific notes on why do I like these poems, why do I like these types of writers, and then I think that really helps in kind of building out your own voice. And there's no, as I said, one way of reading poetry in the sense that it's so subjective, but there is some broad objectivity in there somewhere. I just don't know how to neatly sum that up.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean also, because the reading element is it takes so much time to do that. It's
Yeah.
not just like from one moment to the next. It's like, I liked how you mentioned before, the kind of 10 easy steps on Instagram,
Yeah.
and like achieve success. And it's
Yeah.
funny, I'm actually doing a certificate in NLP. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but it was just like there was this massive sale, and I thought, oh, I'll get a certificate in this because then I can do coaching, and it's sort of quite interesting. It's about kind of hacking your subconscious, but a lot of it is to do with limiting beliefs. And there's certain moments in this process where I'm kind of like, how much do I agree with this? Because I think there are the limiting beliefs, right? There's like, especially if you are a minority, if you're a religious minority, if you're, in any way kind of from a marginalized community, and then writing in a very heavily dominated, like white dominated industry. And with those little glimpses of, yes, we welcome applications from from
Yeah.
marginalized communities, but then at the same time kind of trying to feel out, like, how much really do you want to hear from me?
Yeah.
Like, how much honesty do you want from me? um and of course the editorial um eye is always going to be there, and how much you're actually able to say is going to be defined by that.
Yeah. And it
Like,
can be quite tiring too, right? Like just seeing the, scheme after scheme. You kind of go into this, I'm 31 now, and for the last 10 years, I've been, applying for these types of schemes, and they have benefited me. I'm not gonna lie, massively so. But you get to the point where it's like, am I going to be applying to these schemes for my whole life? And, are you going to respect me as who I am, without that, label? Or will I constantly be having to search for these opportunities for marginalized writers, or, you know, constantly emerging writers? I don't know how long we're all going to be emerging writers. And it seems that at every stage of being a writer, there's this level of difficulty, right? When you start off, there is the difficulty of being a new writer or a novice writer, and then you get maybe published in one thing, and that means that you can't apply to new writer stuff anymore because you're technically published, and then you're in this emerging phase for 25 years, and then you can't apply to other things because you've got a little bit of publishing, but in your mind you're still trying your best to make a living from this, and um, do 20 different things to try and get by. But in the publishing world, in the literary world, you're somewhat established, right? And you can't, and then you get through that stage, and you're trying to get published with a big publisher, and then everyone thinks that you've made it, where you still feel like in the same mindset that you've been in for the last 10 years. So at every stage of being a writer, more so of course if you're from a marginalized group, there's this difficulty, and it just seems like it's a constant grind until until you don't anymore, I guess.
Or maybe it does never end. I don't know. I mean, I think maybe there is something to the creative life, which is a sort of a constant process of growing. And I wonder, do you ever arrive, or there's always got to be
Yeah, yeah,
something else to grow into, otherwise there would never be a book. There has to be some, sometimes you see writers kind of plateauing, and you sort of think, God, I really don't want to plateau. I want to always be sort of finding some new way to grow. But yeah, I guess there's a kind of an anxiety there. This is what I was trying to get to before I was rudely interrupted by my family. About the sort of limiting beliefs versus structural hurdles. Like there's this sort of dual set of forces. Like there's hurdles from without, like as I mentioned, this editorial thing, but then there's also internal things. For example, like you mentioned, like not having that plantilla, that sort of template for being a writer or being an artist, and having to figure that all out for yourself, or thinking, I don't deserve this, or am I really going to be good enough for this, or am I an imposter here, do I belong here, that kind of thing. So I don't know where I'm going with this, but I just wanted to hear your thoughts on, have you ever had to deal with any of that sort of stuff, especially being a Muslim man in a typically non-Muslim kind of writing sphere?
Yeah, I mean, it is similar to what I was saying before. There does seem to be, you're on the lookout, right, for ethnic minority writers, and that, as I said, it's useful, but it can get tiring. It's constantly on the lookout for these things and wanting to be respected for your craft, your skill level, whatever it might be, and feeling like, is that ever going to end, and do I just accept that that's the case and still work on? That's the kind of mentality I've taken on now, is that that might be the case for forever, but I have a responsibility to kind of take care of my craft myself, and do what I can to develop it. And in terms of being a Muslim writer in these spaces, I think it's just about taking the good and leaving the bad, and sometimes there is bad. I mean, the literary world in the UK specifically is the default of it is extremely secular, and so they're very happy to engage with Muslims on an ethnic level, as an exotic menu item, and there might be kind of very well-meaning people who like you were saying earlier, were welcoming applications from X, Y, and Z, but I've come to realize that I don't think that engagement is actually driven by wanting to hear Muslim voices as Muslim voices. It's wanting to hear like an ethnic other, or an otherized community speak up. You get bonus points if you're struggling with your faith. You get bonus points if you're um, going against the tenets of your faith. It's very easy to kind of sell these things. And one of the things that I keep coming back to, I was on a panel recently about faith in film, and I think if there was real desire from these institutions to engage with people of faith, we'd see a lot more Christian cinema. We'd see a lot more Christian art, but we don't. And most people of faith in this country are Christian. So if there was a real kind of interest in faith, you'd see all these Christian artists, but you don't really see that. You see a lot of Muslims on the poetry circuit and things like that, and then you wonder, okay, what's going on here? Do they care about faith in your religion, or is it just the fact that you happen to be Pakistani and you happen to be Muslim, and that's the flavor of the month at the moment? And that's something that really is it kind of eats away at you, and I see it now much more clearly than I did at a few years ago, when Riz Ahmed was in every film, and we seemed to be the kind of flavor of the month for about 3 months in 2019 or wherever it was. And it kind of eats away at you, is that it doesn't always seem kind of completely sincere, and that's where I think you have to kind of turn inward and be confident about who you are, and work on your, take more responsibility for your craft, and understand what these institutions are, and yes, use them for the good that they provide, but also know when to kind of turn away as well.
Yeah, thank you. And you've segued very well into another question I wanted to ask you, which was about how you see your poetry or your writing craft, because you also write stories, of course, and I guess essays. I don't know if you've continued writing since
Yeah.
this is since high school, but how do you feel that interacts with your Islam or your spirituality?
I think now what I'm trying to do is to just write as naturally as possible, without this kind of aboutness to it. Like if I'm writing about life, it just happens to be that I write from my particular worldview, and I think it's particular to kind of minoritized people, where you have this idea of specifically being a Muslim writer, right? And historically, when Muslims were not writing from a place of being a minority, they were just taken at face value, right? So our scholars were seen as public intellectuals, our poets were seen as poets. That are to be engaged. Goethe was, engaging with Hafiz's work. He was engaging with his work as a poet, from a particular tradition, but he wasn't saying that, I'm going to go and read Muslim poets. It just so happened that, that Islam, that religiousness kind of permeated his work. And I'm trying to write like that, in a sense where I don't think about so much, okay, how are people gonna view this as being not Muslim, but write in a way that, yes, of course, takes that into account, in the sense that things have to make sense, but also write much more naturally, and have things as a default, as opposed to kind of introduce them in, as so that this is kind of ticking the box of being about British Muslim identity. And I tried very, very hard not to do that with my book, in a sense. And I think some ways, alhamdulillah, I succeeded, because there's been so many different types of people that talk about the book in different ways. And so I think, at least in that sense, I succeeded in not kind of putting it in this box where, some people do see it as a book about British Muslim identity. Some people see it as a book about grief and growing up. Some people see it as a book about, people talking about British capitalism in the blurbs of the book. So I was very kind of conscious about writing naturally, and trying to write naturally and strongly, in a way that allows people to kind of just respect you on your own terms, and not kind of already put you in some box as oh, it's nice, look, they're writing as well, kind of thing. So
yeah, that's a really important point. I think the unself-consciousness, and I wish there was a less clunky word for that, but I suppose natural is the non-clunky version of that. But I guess I have come to the idea of naturalness in writing via the self-consciousness, because it's like that's how you have to deal with it, because if you set out as a writer, and at every turn, every line, you're like, oh, how are people going to receive this, or how do I have to explain myself, or things like this, then it's like wading through treacles, you know, rather than getting into a real flow. And I think that's really important. I find you have a very strong voice, which is clearly you as a London Asian Muslim, but it doesn't feel like you're like waving any flags. It's not like here I am, I've set myself into this category, and here are 10 facts about me as an Asian Muslim kind of thing. It's like it's very sort of holistically woven through, because the story itself has to stand. It's like, that's how I think I feel I gauge good writing. It's like if the story itself stands, and on top of that I get this really personal view of the world from this writer, that it can only have come back from that writer. It's so kind of drenched in their experience, and then it feels very real. You know, it has that realism, but it has got those universal themes, and it is about grief, it's about growing up, and it's about bereavement, and it's about just family and all these different things, which of course everybody can relate to. And I think that is, I feel, a really good lesson for us as Muslim writers as well, because then it shows that this is how you can get your work. You know, I don't want to be siloed in my work either. I don't want to be
pigeonholed.
Thank you. Yeah, like it's one thing, I always find myself wanting to write about Islam and wanting to write about faith and how it kind of just shows up in everyday life. And just because those are the things that erupt and sort of need an outlet. So I'm just gonna admit, Shan. Sorry, I didn't greet you earlier, Nushat. I didn't see you come in. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome.
Walaikum assalam.
And she just commented, actually, we're all messy, complex shapes that can only be put into our own boxes. I love that. And the boxes are not square. They're like multi-shaped polygons. I don't know what you call them.
Messy, complex shapes, yeah.
I wanted to circle back briefly to what you mentioned at the beginning, and your mum's love of Urdu poetry, and initially you were like not into that, and you were into hip hop, and then she was like, what is this? What were some of the, first of all, who were some of the rappers that you really liked? And what was the process there for you of kind of tapping back into Urdu poetry, or in some form?
So I would say my favorite rapper is probably Yasin Bey, formerly known as Mos Def. So I kind of fell in love with his work quite early on, and then I think through him, he used to host Def Poetry Jam, which a lot of poets my age kind of had their experience of poetry guided by that show. And so him and Talib Kweli and Commonwealth were some of my favorite rappers at the time. And that kind of, it really, because as I said, it was in lockstep with my kind of political awakening, and because a lot of the music had, you know, overtones and undertones of politics in it, it kind of helped me appreciate the written word in that way. And then it was only, so when I was very young, probably up until the age of 15, I was going to Urdu lessons in terms of being able to read and write Urdu, which again at the time I was no big fan of. But later on in life, it really helped me when I came to kind of mature in my appreciation of poetry. Then I, you know, started looking back at this stuff and looking at it with a new eye, right? Be it Qawwali music or the music that my parents liked when I was younger, just being able to appreciate it in a whole new light. And then now I can, to a degree, engage with, you know, old Urdu poetry, people like Ahmed Fez. I can kind of read that in Urdu, and I'm very, very glad that, you know, alhamdulillah, I went through that at the time arduous process of, like, you know, after school or whatever it was, at an auntie's house, a family friend's house, who would teach us to read and write Urdu. That now I can engage with that work, and it's so rich, right? And it connects me then to just a long tradition of Urdu poetry in a way that I wasn't connected to before. And so yeah, it's been a slow kind of turnaround. But now, like, I count some of those poets as some of my favorite poets, and just being able to engage with them mostly in their own language and using a little bit of mum and a little bit of the internet for translation support. It's now like and it's probably clear in my work now as well that it's part of my the tapestry of work that I pull on for inspiration.
Mashallah, that's so cool. Talib Kweli and Mos Def, actually it was Mos Def, they would literally single-handedly turned me on to hip hop. And I think it was he says,
Yeah,
by that time they'd already gone through Black Star and then into
yeah,
he put out Black on Both Sides, and that was like
yes.
the first hip hop album I ever bought, and I just like memorized
Mhm.
every single word. Oh my gosh. To go back to a very quick question earlier I had, you mentioned about people doing lots of different things to get by as writers. Do you offer workshops, writing workshops?
I do, yeah. So that's one of the things that I do, and I've also started putting on writing retreats recently for Muslim writers. The first one of which was just this weekend, so it was a long, arduous kind of process of getting that through. But alhamdulillah, very, very happy with how it went, and it was focused around poets, but in the future there'll be kind of different uh, genres that will be the theme. But yeah, if anybody's around the UK, they can look up on my Instagram. It will be there. The Crescent Writing Retreats is the page, and so yeah, I've been doing workshops for a while, and it kind of through came through doing workshops for different organizations over quite a long period of time, and realizing that, okay, again, this is something that maybe I can do. I never had the kind of confidence around it. Um, I remember speaking to someone once who was not a writer, and he said, "Oh, do you do workshops?" And I said, "No, not really." And he said, "What? Like, I do writing workshops, and I'm not a writer, so why are you not doing them?" And so he was a youth worker, and so he was saying that, if I can do it, then you should do it. I remember the first time somebody asked me to do a workshop, I said no, I think, because I'd never done it before. And then I told a writer friend of mine, and she was like, "You should have just said yes and just done it." And then I did start saying yes, and obviously going through the writer development schemes that I went through, and sitting through those workshops really helped in kind of building my own practice of it. But yeah, that's something that I very slowly realized that I could do as well. So I do workshops if anybody's interested.
Well, we'd definitely like to collaborate on something. So watch the space. Inshallah, we can do
100%, yeah.
stuff. We're mainly just doing everything online. We have done a one-day writing retreat here in my town, and
Mm,
we're going to do an in-person retreat in May, inshallah. But we hope to do lots more, because something about getting writers together and writing, it's like you can have the skills and you can love writing, but it's not until you actually have like, okay, we're going to be sitting
mm,
down next 2 hours and we're going to be doing this and like time
mm,
it and have prompts, and then you actually
mm.
I constantly like flabbergast myself. Why, when I love writing and enjoy it so much, do I find it so hard to just like park my butt down and do it? But yeah,
Yeah,
retreats are
yeah.
workshops in general, but I think retreats is like the next evolution. So that's really
Mm.
exciting. I'm really happy for that. Okay, so let's talk a bit about this book. I still don't know if you can actually see this because it blurs. I have to
A
turn it into my
little
face.
bit, yeah. So I was working on this book before I knew it was going to be a book. Really, I was in a phase of my writing life where I didn't actually want to publish. I was really kind of focused on getting better as a writer and focusing on craft, and not doing as much kind of applying and submitting and open micing and things like that. So I just took time to kind of really get into to reading more and writing more and getting better. And I slowly started putting together some poems. And it was at that time that um, Farhana, my publisher, got in touch with me um, about they were starting this new press, and they wanted me to be one of the first authors. And so I thought, even though I'm not in the mood for publishing right now, it'd be silly not to take this opportunity with both hands. And initially it was just a collection of poetry that at the time was, yeah, around these themes of coming of age and growing up. Um and then when I learned a bit about their press. Again, I remember saying to them that this book is not particularly, overtly political, and yours is a kind of loud and proud political press, and I don't know if this is going to be right for you, but I'm happy to send you what I'm working on. And when I sent what I was working on, they were very happy to have it, and I think they appreciated that it was slightly different from the other work that they may have been publishing at the time. So they said, "Yep, we're happy to have it," and I gave them the deadline of when I'd be able to finish it, and then they asked me to add short stories, which was not in the plan. So I was writing short stories at the time just for fun, and I was sharing them online. And that's actually where my publisher saw my work, and she said that, we want the books to be of a certain length for the first, publishing run, and would you be interested in adding short stories so that it's a larger book? And in my mind, I was like, no, I'm not ready. But then I thought, if you think I am, then sure, I'll give it a go. And then I very kind of clunkily put the short stories um, at the end of the book and had all the poetry at the beginning, thinking this was fine. And making it in time for the deadline, and then they came back with this. This is why editors are so important, and for people trying to get into writing, working with editors, however you can, is really important, because they kind of saw these threads in the poems and the stories that I didn't see because I was so focused on getting this done in time. And so they had the idea of kind of separating the book into themes and sections, which now I know works really, really well. But that was all them. That was them, looking through the work and seeing these threads, and giving these sections these titles, which I thought worked really well. So yeah, that's how that happened, and the rest is kind of the rest is history, I think.
Tell us about the playlist though.
Yeah. So yeah, that was also something that they were doing with all the writers, that they wanted a playlist at the beginning of each book, and I'm just trying to find it on this version, but
Page
it was
5.
they were supposed to be kind of companion songs to the book, not necessarily, directly related, but maybe it was songs that were being listened to at the time of writing, or listened to a lot whilst writing the work, or songs that I felt fit the theme. And it's been really nice to hear so many people say good things about the playlist as well as the book, because it's kind of something that you think is just going to be forgotten and on the side. But yeah, a lot of people have said nice things about the playlist, so alhamdulillah.
Yeah, and I think it's a really great way. It's now now we've kind of entered into this like turbocharged Substack era, and that's actually how I connected with you through Substack, although I'd seen your poetry before. One thing that I really like about Substack is that people will kind of give their film recommendations and their what I'm reading and like books and stuff, because I just don't even trust newspapers anymore. Like I've just become very cynical. I only want it from people. I don't want it from any kind of corporation. I want any kind of advertising going in my brain. I want to have somebody telling me,
Yeah.
this is amazing. You need to hear it or you need to read it. And a lot of those songs I'd never seen before. And I reviewed a book by Richard Thompson, who was a folk musician who actually became Muslim, but at the same time as my dad, they played music together. And the book, I kept every time he would mention a song, I would go and look at it, and then I'd have it playing while I listened. I was like, wow, this is mind blowing. This is such a great way to read a book, because it's got like these extra dimensions. And like I've just discovered a whole bunch of new musicians, and it just made me really happy. So I really hope that continues. I think it's a really cool. It's not
Yeah,
just a
I've not seen it before either, so it was a nice kind of light thing to add to the after the the deadline, approaching. It was nice to like focus on something that's a bit more light, and just put together a playlist companion to the work.
beautiful. Okay, would you read us a poem?
Yeah, sure. I thought I'd read one poem that was written after um, Faiz Ahmed Faiz, one of his most famous poems, but it's called Old Love. If you ask me for the old love, know that it is different now, and there are other ways to die. When you see a man buy and sell the earth like it was a biscuit, It's hard not to look over your shoulder when you walk. So if you ask me for the old love, know that it is different now, and there are other ways to die. Once you've seen shepherds in Arabia compete with each other in building skyscrapers, your faith is a little stronger, but you walk more slowly. If my lips are heavy with tainted soil, I was searching for water and hiding from air. So if you ask me for the old love, know that it's different now. Love, don't bother with that question. You'd still embarrass the moon, that he's staring out the window with a sad playlist. As it turns out, the view is pretty clear from there, and there's no shortage of handguns. One night, in the middle of playing with the sea, he mistook a predator drone for a falcon, and he hasn't been the same since. It's different now. There are so many ways to die. Thank you.
Mashallah, so good. So good.
Thank you.
And I just love how there's this kind of the sort of the ancient and the contemporary just coexists in this like weird harmony. It's like it all sits together so well, and yet there's so much kind of juxtaposition and so much contrast, and there's the handguns, the moon, and the playlist, and it just like the biscuit. I love the biscuit. It's such a British thing, right?
Yeah.
All about the biscuits, but yet the biscuit has this whole kind of sordid history with sugar and slavery, and it's like got all these resonances between Urdu poetry and
Yeah.
like a romantic view of the world that's like been slammed up against this very
Yeah.
harsh, corporate, ugly
That's what the original Fez's poem was about. That don't ask me for the old love. He says, and he's basically saying, because I've seen too much. That when you've seen people being bought and sold or whatever he says, I can't remember exactly in translation, but when you've seen all this horror, don't expect me to love you in the same way. That it's scarring in that way. So yeah.
But do you think that poetry has that capacity to help us verbalize, first of all, but also process and potentially find ways of dreaming or hoping our way into a vision out of that, if that makes sense? Maybe that doesn't make sense.
I think so. I think that no, it does make sense. I think that's always been the case, not just with poetry, but with writing, in the sense that it's another way to engage with the horrors of the world that it kind of exists in its own world. Like, you can take in information from the news, and you can experience it firsthand and hear from people. But reading about it adds another layer of understanding that I think can give you hope, but it can also, I think, just allow you to sit with the information in a different way, and appreciate the different layers of something that's going on in the world, where it might allow you to see that in a way that first-hand testimony or the news won't do, and it just adds layer to it, and adds layer to the way that you understand the world, I guess.
Yeah, mashallah. Okay, so we're at, it's 8 p.m. for me, which is 7 p.m. for you guys. So we haven't got too much time left, but if anyone has any other questions or comments, pop them in the chat. I just wanted to ask lastly, what would be, well, it's kind of two parts of this. What do you feel is the role of writing and poetry for Muslims, particularly in our time? And what kind of advice would you have?
I'll do the second one first. In terms of advice, I would say do whatever you can to work on your craft. I think we have such a rich tradition, a rich heritage of literature and writing, that it would be a shame if we didn't pull on that to create new work. And we do really have a kind of civilizational worldview that has produced some of the greatest poets in history. And as I said before, those poets were taken at face value. They were not just kind of Muslim poets; they were poets, par excellence. And so to kind of pull on that, and to really focus on craft and understand, what it was that made those poets who they were, and not turn away completely from craft, even though it's easy to do sometimes in the poetry world. But just in writing in general, I really think that the revival, if you like, not to use those terms too heavily, but the revival of Muslims, be that in the East or the West, it can't happen without a revival in the arts. Um, and I think, what was the other question? Sorry, I don't want to forget it before I
Um,
carry on.
what do you think the importance of poetry and writing is for Muslims
Yes.
in our time?
Yeah. So yeah, that leads me on to that. I think it's very, very important in the sense that um I don't think it would be an incomplete success without the success of writers, and again, it's these are grand terms like civilizational and institutional building, but really that's where we come from, and there's no reason why we can't tap into that. And it will look different because, you know, if we're writing in English, and I'm very, very aware of that. um it will look different, but there's, I think, a way to connect with that tradition and write in English and still be taken seriously, and taken at a kind of face value as being artists. And yeah, it's important to have these institutions, and I know that Muslim Writers Salon is looking at a long view. As I said before, it's more than just this is how you get published and you can do this on Amazon and you'll, you know, sell 100 books a day or whatever it is. But things like that, things like Islamic Literary Society, I don't know if your followers have heard of that, but they're trying to kind of promote this kind of reading culture amongst Muslims, and engagement with the literary world. Yeah, any kind of progress or success is incomplete, I think, without the arts in tow. So yeah, very, very important.
Alhamdulillah, thank you. And thank you for your appreciation. Like, really, I think we need to build these connections as well with other organizations. I'd never heard of the Islamic Literary Society. Thank you for that heads up. And everybody else has now heard of Crescent Writing Retreats. So I'm really looking forward to doing something to work together more, inshallah.
Definitely, definitely. I'd love to come abroad and do a retreat abroad one day. So
Yes,
maybe late
fantastic.
2024 do something.
Inshallah. Inshallah. We wanted to do one in England as well. I mean, like, yeah, obviously, if you
Okay.
go to Spain, it's maybe nice for you.
Yeah.
um, Nuzhat says, she asks, are there any open mics you can recommend in London?
Um, a lot of them, unfortunately, over COVID, just kind of disappeared. I think funding left us, but there's still some around. I think Off the Chest spoken word still exists. I think it's in South London,
Off the
10
chest.
Underwater, I think. But yeah, the ones that I used to go to, unfortunately, are not around, or have um yeah, it's difficult. I would say that you can find them by Googling them. Yeah, Rumi's Cave is one. They're still very, very active. They were kind of one of the first open mics that I went to in my uni days, back when they were in a much smaller building. So fond memories of reading
We
mediocre
probably
poetry.
bumped into each other then because I used to go when they were in the Kilburn place. So
Yes, 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 yes. But yeah, there are a few. You'll probably be able to find them um, through other nights. I know the people behind Bad Betty Press, I think, still have a night. I'm not the best person to ask at the moment because I've been so out the loop with that world for some time. Um,
yeah, we
but
can
yeah,
ask Warren. Yeah, and if he's put in the chat that we can ask Warren Clemenston, who's one of our OG members since the beginning. But he does open mics. He's been doing open mics in London.
and I think there's still one at the Poetry Cafe in Covent Garden at some frequency. I don't know when they do it anymore, but I believe they still have a night there as well. But yeah,
Yeah,
that's all very London centric, but I apologize.
it's all right.
I'm
You're
sure there's others
representing.
around the country.
Also, we had some comments from Amal says this resonates currently, and Zishan replied to that. Yes, the sight of a Muslim man reciting poetry, speaking about these searing emotions is extremely poignant because of the current context. And I would also add that I'm glad that you mentioned hip hop in the beginning because it's just been really beautiful to see solidarity right now between Black Americans and Palestinians and Muslims in general. I mean, obviously not there are Black Americans who are Muslim also, but like, you know, seeing people are recognizing that they're drawing these parallels and these connections between oppressive systems. And subhanAllah, I just think that the poets perhaps have a little bit of a privileged, or not privileged, but like a special kind of platform for addressing these
I thought it was
problems.
really, really beautiful yesterday when um the Ghazni poet and teacher of poetry, Rifat, I think Al-Arir is his name, Al-Arir. If I'm saying that incorrectly, I apologize. He was killed in an airstrike, and he had written a poem, um, "If I Must Die," I think is the title. And I saw
Yes, I was there. Were
yesterday.
you in London? Sorry, that's me butting in. Was it read out in London? Yeah.
No, no, I was just seeing yesterday or the day before, there was many, many people translating that poem into different
Yeah.
languages.
Yeah.
And it was really, really beautiful to read it in Urdu and a little bit of Punjabi, and there were people translating it into, I
Yeah.
think, Chinese I saw as well. It was really, really beautiful to see that kind of
Yeah, that's
his
what he was read out. It was read out at the march
at
in
the protest.
London.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, by Maxine Peake, the actress. And it was absolutely beautiful. Lots of people had placards with big
Mm,
kites made out of white with white tails on them with that written on. So yeah, that poetry actually reaches people a lot better than sometimes than images
mm,
even and the news.
And songs, and like also it's interesting, the
Yeah.
Urdu poetry thing and Persian poetry as well, it often gets, and Arabic as well, ends up being sung because it
mm.
has a format that is easily transmittable.
Yeah,
It rhyme and verse, it kind of lends itself more easily
yeah,
to melody. It just sort of feels quite natural to do that. And then
yeah,
it's a way of transmitting. It's like the original social media, like before X, before internet, before anything. I think
yeah,
songs were the viral memes, that was how people transmitted
yeah.
ideas.
Just culturally, I think as well. Like
Yeah,
even
for
in,
sure.
I remember seeing back in the day, many years ago, in when music videos were on TV and on Urdu channels, um, there would be kind of a thing in the corner that said, singer was X, producer was Y, and then it would say poet underneath. That so many of these songs were just, as I said before, famous poems that people had put to melody. And I think poetry permeates those cultures in a way that perhaps English doesn't, or doesn't now. Even though I think it's probably slipping, specifically in Pakistan, but it's very common. Even my grandmother, who's not didn't go to university and study literature or anything, but she can quote you lines that she probably doesn't know, the full thing, but she can quote you lines of poetry that are very kind of profound and subtle, and I don't think that exists as strongly there, nor does it exist in the UK, where people can, the layperson, if you like, can have access to that and recite it from memory still at an old age. So there's something to rebuild there as well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's also speaks to the importance of poetry in Muslim cultures, particularly because, yeah, it has been interesting. It has been important, I think. And like folk music has been very important in England, and, but a lot of those cultures have been really degraded. And, part of
Yeah,
that is kind of sneering or scorn or depreciation of folk culture in general, or
yeah,
just
yeah.
has been destroyed by industrialization and so many different things. And
And
so
kind of replaced with this kind of nebulous concept of Britishness, right? Where there's other cultures within Britain, like you say, these folk cultures that have a long history, but that's not talked about as much as this weird, nonsensical British
like TV
culture that,
Britain. It's like a kind of yeah, like sort of the Britain of Dancing with the Stars or something like that, where
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah, yeah,
it feels very contrived. It doesn't feel
yeah,
really that located in. It's like quality streets, Christmas adverts, like holiday
yeah.
special. It's just like a certain kind
Very
of,
superficial.
yeah, it's like Asda. It has this feeling. It's like, what is Britain anymore? It doesn't even feel like it exists. Like there's just
Mm,
such a kind of contrived sort of commercialized version of it. And same you can say with America, although America really never did exist. Sorry, but as an American, as an American citizen, yeah. It's a slightly different story. Amal has written, wait, I need to go back. Zishan said it was read out at our protest in Glasgow too yesterday. And Nusrat said the words enter hearts. Absolutely. Amal says, thank you, Jamal and others. This has been so helpful. As someone who felt I couldn't write because I didn't want to perform, it's so nice to meet Muslim writers trying to stay true and authentic. Yes. I love the idea of writing, of viewing writing as self-development, and noted Jamal's advice on practicing one's craft by reading and listening to poetry often. I love play and play on words, but it was good to hear the foundation is necessary and rigor. but that can be cultivated and isn't just something some are born with and others are not. That is a super important point. Thank you, Amal. This is something that is you can work on. It's not just an inborn talent. It's not something that, you know, people often say like talent is 1% and 99% is just slog. And maybe some people have more, you know, they lean more towards, or they have more ease with language and work. But like really put the hours in and you'll definitely see a difference. I often think that a big part of writing, learning to write, a really big part is just mechanical. It's just your hand has to keep moving and moving, moving and moving. And eventually like you start noticing, oh, I'm about to do the same thing I've done 20 times. And that's different now. I'm going to do something, you know, it quite almost intuitively starts evolving and changing. Nusrat says, when my father was losing his memory towards the end, he used to recite poetry. He had hearted as a child. I love that, the use of that verb. He'd hearted it. Mashallah, that's so nice. And
I think that was a
song
miswrite, but never mind. It works better as hearted.
I like it. It's not
I meant to say
right.
he had learned off by heart as a child, but yeah, came out as hearted. That's good.
I love that. I think that's very poetic of you. Nusrat is a great poet, by the way. And Amal and Anam, I haven't read Zishan's poetry yet, but I'm sure it's amazing too. Zishan says, I remember reading one of my mum's Urdu poetry books. I would read the English translation and she would then read the Urdu original to me, and her chin would wobble from emotion every time. Oh, that's so sweet. MashaAllah. Now that's something to write about. That is a memory to write about. We've got writing prompts, by the way, from this whole session. Tomorrow, they're really easy. I really like the fact that you mentioned the poem you read out was it kind of partly reworking or in response to a song. And I think that's a really lovely way to bring in, you know, heritage, culture, things that have entered into that kind of stew of who you are, but like to do it a new way that it makes sense to you now. And just to show that there's resonances just repeat. It's like a wave that just comes up and then it'll dip down and it'll come up again. And what was the other thing I was going to say? Yes, songs have a specific capacity to trigger memory, and people with Alzheimer's have they've done work with people with Alzheimer's. They've given them, play them the songs from their youth, and they immediately start talking about their memories, and it's like their memories come back. They can like come out of like a sort of semi-comatose kind of state because of listening to songs they remembered. And one other little anecdote I want to share. There was an Irish woman I read about who traveled to the US when as a 2-year-old. No longer, she left behind Ireland, never went back to Ireland. And then in her 90s, she had a stroke and she started singing Irish lullabies that she had not heard since before she left Ireland. So they're all in there. It's all in there. And I think there's a lot more as well. There's an ancestral connection. I wanted to just mention, sorry, this interview is meant to be about you and I'm making it about me. But I love the memory of the translation of poems, because I think my introduction to Sufi poetry, Arabic poetry, really Arabic in general, was by being in a dhikr gathering and reading the book that my mum had painstakingly written out in transliteration with the translation underneath. And to be reading the translation in a language you don't understand or you just partially understand, it just also gives this kind of multi-dimensional experience, because you're getting it in languages. It's like stereo sound of language. So anyway, thank you so much. This has been such a great discussion, super interesting. Mashallah, Mabruk on your amazing book. I urge everyone to go out and buy it because it's really beautiful and you can learn a lot. And look out for some writing prompts tomorrow, those of us who are members. And inshallah, we'll be working with Jamal again soon.
Inshallah. Thank you all so much for having me and for giving your time. I really enjoyed it, and I wish you all the very, very best with what you're doing at Muslim Writers Salon, and like you said, it'll be great to work together in the future as well, inshallah. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much for joining.
Take care. Alaikum salam.
Assalamu alaikum.